Hey, everybody, it's Mike Jeff for Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, and welcome to Chicago Music Revealed. We are back again here. It is Wednesday. Man, we had a great show yesterday, had a great show on Monday. This is going to be an incredible show. We're actually bringing Ryan Cohan, who's going to be on here in 1 second after I do my little intro here, but we had him as a feature interview for Chicago Jazz Magazine back in 2019, in January 2019. And so for those of you, because we're not going to delve completely into his career and all of the different things we talked about in that interview, simply because we don't have the time. Plus, he has a brand new release coming out that we're going to talk about specifically. But if you want to learn more about Ryan, I encourage everybody to head over to ChicagoJazzMagazine.com. You can check everything out about all of the whole interview. We talked about his background coming up in music, and also a lot of concepts about compositional concepts, which we are going to cover on this, not the compositional concepts specifically, but about this new release, which is quite an endeavor. It's called Originations. It's coming out July 17th. So we are going to bring Ryan on right now. And Ryan, hey, thanks for being on Chicago Music Revealed. How are you?
Hey, all right, Mike. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be
No,
with you.
hey, I'm glad we could make this happen. I'm equally excited to talk about this recording, because when I had you on as the feature interview for Chicago Jazz Magazine back November 2019, we had sort of discussed this a little bit, but we didn't
Mm.
really, it wasn't even close to being even started at that point. And now with the completed project, I mean, congratulations to you. First of all, I should also mention
Thank you.
Ryan is a Guggenheim Fellow, and this is his third commissioned piece with support of the Chamber Music America New Jazz Works. And the name of the recording is Originations. It's coming out on Origin Records July 17th. I think I covered all the bases there, Ryan. So I'm gonna let you talk about this, because the story behind this recording is really fascinating. You know, even though we're not going to preview any tracks on this, the story behind it is going to make you wait until July 17th, because you're going to want to hear this. So, Ryan, tell us the background about how this entire commission piece came about.
Sure. Well, this was it all began about 12 years ago when I was doing some touring, and I ended up in Amman, Jordan, on the last leg of a tour that I was on with my group, and it was just I had never been to that part of the world actually at that time. And I just thought I had heard from some of the people that had set the tour up. They said, you guys are going to have an incredible time. You're going to love the city. And I was just excited to be there. And that's how I went into it. And so we were there for about a week, touring and playing different venues and doing different educational workshops. Um, right when we landed, and immediately when we started meeting people, there was just this very unusual connection that I had, that with the people that I was meeting, and particularly with the guides that were handling us. They were looking at me and seeing something very familiar in me, and I was also in them. And when we'd be performing, people were coming up to me and really relating to me. And as it turns out, my family, my paternal side, my biological father was from that part of the world, and I never knew him growing up. My parents got separated when I was very young, and I was raised basically from my mother's side, and then she got remarried when I was very young, and that's the life that I knew and the family that I knew. And the way I grew up, there was never an issue of sort of, I was never that curious about that side of my lineage, just because I had a pretty, I had a pretty secure upbringing. I was pretty content,
Yeah.
and here I was, I landed in that part of the world, and at the time I was in my, like late, in my 30s, and all of a sudden I was confronted with a place that was from my paternal homeland, my paternal ancestors, And I realized I knew he was from near that region. I didn't realize how close I was. And he's from an area called Nablus, which is, near Amman. But I just had not, I didn't really know much about it. And we were working with somebody who, I was asking me questions about my background, and I never really talked about it. And it's like, yeah, my father's family's from, somewhere near here, but I didn't realize it was so close.
Yeah.
So anyway, after that experience, and again, like after I was playing gigs and performances, people are coming up to me. They're seeing, these Americans playing jazz, but then at the same time, they're coming up to me and go, are you Jordanian? Are you Jordanian? I didn't realize, yeah, I am, but I just never had, really explored that part of my life. As crazy as that may sound, that's what it was.
Well,
And
you know what
so
I find fascinating though, just to jump in right here, is that I've been in situations before where I've been somewhere and it just feels like I'm comfortable there for some reason. It's just I can't explain it. I don't know why. And then I learn that my family came from this area or that area or something like that. Is that the kind of feeling you were getting the whole time? Like you're there and you had, were you feeling like this is weird? It's almost like I'm comfortable being here, even though I'm in a foreign country I've never been in before.
that's exactly what it was. And I had never experienced anything quite like that or anything, yeah, nothing like that. And I wasn't even like, it wasn't even on my radar when I landed there.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, and it was so much so that I actually, it's funny, I met this friend from this tour that I had done many years before that one with the great trumpeter in Chicago, Orbert Davis. I had played with him for many years, and we'd traveled a bit as well. And we did this one tour it was in Korea of all places in early 2000 in the 2000s, and we met this very well known child psychologist who was part of a like a tour that was also going on at the same time, and he loves jazz. And he was in residence at the University of Chicago. This great guy. And when I came back from the tour in Jordan, I called him up and I said, "Let's get dinner. I just want to talk to you about this." I said, "Is it possible to have a sense of being somewhere that is just it's nature more than nurture?" Because I had
Yeah.
no sense of nurture of knowing that part of the world. And so we had this, just having this long conversation about the psychology and the psyche and what's is something like that possible. I never experienced anything like that, and it was like what you described. It was like I was familiar with it in a way, and again, I wasn't looking for it, so it completely caught me off guard.
Yeah.
So fast forward a few years, and then because of that, it made me curious about connecting with my biological father. Again, like it was never an urgent thing to me before, as strange as that may sound, but so it took a couple years, and then I ended up reconnecting with my father, my biological father, and discovering that I also had siblings that I didn't even know, half siblings,
Wow.
and it really it really opened just this other world up, especially being raised Jewish my whole life, and that's been a part of my identity.
Hmm.
And then I never really had incorporated this, this Arab Palestinian side to my personality, and it just turns out that I was met and just reconnected with this beautiful family that I didn't even know I really had with my half siblings, and all are discovered this even larger family, all very educated and into just all kinds of different areas of life and different professions. And so the whole experience just sort of made me start thinking about just my background a little bit, and I've always been very intrigued with the musical side of the background of that part of the world. It's always been something that resonated with me. So as I was, working, I ended up getting this commission, like around 2015,
Hmm.
and I was like, all right, I'm gonna just kind of explore some of this, and I wanted to keep it in my. It wasn't sort of this complete re-identity of finding this new identity or re-identifying myself, but it was sort of bringing those parts of myself together with the parts of myself of of what I just sort of connecting, thinking about where I am with all these different parts, both from my family background and also my musical influences, and just connecting all those different pieces together. So I started, you know, and I've been into music, from uh, you know, uh, from like Africa and North Africa, and there's a lot of those influences in Arab music, and so all these
Yeah.
things just kind of were resonating to me in a natural way. And so when I was thinking about this music that I wanted to write, I was bringing them all together, both from the personal side of the experience, and also there were many musical going back to many musical influences that I had and wanting to just explore them without thinking about genre or type and bring everything together. And that's how this project came to be, which was very much of how I felt about my, personal connection of bringing these, Arab and Jewish sides together, and how it all connected with my musical works from many years before that of traveling and trying to connect with people through music and also through jazz, how jazz does not discriminate with all its different musical elements. It brings everything into the mix, and it all becomes part of the music. It's all jazz,
Yeah.
and it's just so that's a broad description of it.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, there's so many directions we could go in this conversation, but just, I mean, when you were there and you're playing and you're feeling like you had been there before, and then you come back to the States and what made you decide that you wanted to reconnect with your paternal father? Because that's not, I mean, was it just because you were there and you're having these feelings and you came back and you explored it, you're talking to your friend, you went out to dinner, you're talking a little bit about it and stuff? Was that the biggest motivator? Because obviously you weren't, that wasn't top of mind until this experience happened. So, I mean, that had to be,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
talk
yeah,
a little bit about it. Yeah.
exactly. It was again, I think you hear about experiences people have of connecting with their family where they're looking to find themselves or to connect a piece, or that there was a piece that needed to be filled in. Um, I was looking at it like, you know what, I this is just a reality. Like the fact to have an experience like that where it was so familiar,
Yeah.
I just became curious for the first time. I was like, all right, like this is something that's worth connecting the dots. Like it is meaningful, even though it wasn't on the forefront of my mind at the time. And since then, it's sort of opened up for me where I've realized that it is impactful for me. But it sort of came to be after that, as opposed to be what motivated me to do it. I think it was seeing, wow, like just the familiarity. It was a very surreal experience, just seeing like physical traits that were so similar in the people that we're meeting.
Yeah.
And then later discovering, again, it was surreal discovering like half siblings, which, it was just the circumstances of the way my family evolved that it became that way, that I didn't know about them when they actually had known about me.
Right.
So when I connected with them, it was a very surreal experience. And then seeing these very similar traits that we share both, and somewhat there's certain personality traits, which is really bizarre to me, being on halfway across the
Right.
world.
Yeah.
And then just the physical traits, where most people, that have siblings, they've grown up with, they having sharing similar physical traits. For me, that was the first time I experienced that.
Wow, man.
So, all of it just sort of opened up, and it sort of evolved naturally, as opposed to, like it was. Because I don't think if I had gone there, I don't know if that would have happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's incredible how things sometimes happen, and the fact that you were able to do this, reconnect with your biological father, plus find out you had extended family, and then be able to put this together into this incredible new release that you're about to put out, Originations. Now, you wrote the music. It's an 11-piece chamber orchestra, chamber jazz orchestra, I believe, is what you're calling it,
Mhm.
right? So,
Yeah, chamber ensemble. Yeah,
okay, chamber
yeah.
ensemble. I'm just a drummer with a show, so you got to guide me through this stuff.
Ensemble, orchestra, it's all the same. Orchestra, yeah, it's like,
So,
yeah, I think even bigger than that. Yeah.
but I know when we talked, when we did the feature interview, getting involved, talking about your concepts and how you sit down and start to think about things and how you start to manifest different pieces and get the themes and the ideas and stuff. Talk about this because, I mean, with such an emotional, I mean, it's got to be a close emotional, thing to put something like this together with this type of theme behind it. How did you even sit down to start conceiving what things would sound like? And to your point, when we first started talking today, I mean, there's so many different styles of music mixed in to the Arabic, along with,
Mm.
you know, the American jazz music and all the other influences that you have in your compositional, repertoire. I mean, how do you sit down and just start to write something that's going to tell the story that you want it to tell? I mean, where's the
Yeah,
even beginning
that's a good
points?
question, and that was, with this process, and I wasn't looking to make it a definitive expression of the experience, or necessarily, on both, on all these different aspects of that experience. I wasn't looking for the music to necessarily. It wasn't look to. I didn't look for it to be a definitive expression of that or a statement of that. It was more, because for a couple of reasons. One also was just that it only till recently that I can even sort of sit down and sort of articulate all these things. Like it's just it was, and the music sort of helped me sort of process it. Just to As I just sort of got into just sort of exploring these different themes and these different aspects of all these things. So it really was just sort of, it was just sort of going with a vibe, or going with a mode or a feeling without trying to define it. A lot of it came from listening. It sort of prompted me to listen to a lot of different Arabic music, and music were played by Arabic instruments, particularly listening to different oud performances and
Yeah,
great oud players, and was more. It wasn't so much the traditional. I listened to some of it, the very traditional, like real, to understand the history of it. It was more connecting to the sounds that appealed to me of my taste, and seeing, and just opened up to a whole world of artists that was immediately connecting with. And so as I was listening to a lot of that music and exploring those sounds, which were just sounds that I loved, um, and I just was sort of getting into the vibe of the whole experience, and just started writing, and just sort of let it just wrote, and
mm-hmm.
eventually let the music tell me what the story was going to be, as opposed to sitting down and saying, all right, well, this was my experience, this is exactly what I want to say.
Yeah,
It was no, it's like, this isn't going to represent this whole experience. This isn't some statement from me about that. And it was, and just also, I was sort of debating how much personally I wanted to really even divulge in the narrative of this music.
yeah, I
And
can
there's the
imagine.
things I'm talking. There's a lot more to this, obviously, but it is part of. It was part of my experience, and also I really celebrate the idea of bringing these two cultures together, which was part
Yeah,
of what I loved about writing and creating projects over the last 10 years, with a lot of large works that I've done of the process of bringing cultures that together through music that might not come together otherwise. And that became a relevant part of this narrative for me. It was just the fact that I celebrate the fact that I'm part of these two cultures that have such a divisive and continuing divisive history, and it's one of the most complicated histories that continues today, of the fighting
yep,
and the biases that continue between them. And so that's part of my sort of talking about this, or motivation of bringing it, my personal side, and of talking about the personal experience with the music. And I couldn't make a definitive expression of all that, because it's still evolving in my head, and like I still can't quite get my arms completely around it. But when I get into the vibe, when I just sort of go with these modes that I'm feeling, and just and using the music and just writing, it starts to reveal things to me, and I trust it, and it worked. Like in this case, like came out with this piece, and it said something
Yeah.
to this experience that it revealed itself to me, as opposed to sitting down and trying to say, well, I'm going to put this experience in the music, and this is how it's going to happen.
Did you ever
And
have you ever like really delved into some of this music before? Like, is I mean, you must have really found a lot of things out about some of this music that you never really, maybe you heard bits and pieces of, certain Arabic music or certain different styles of music from that region. But I mean, it sounds to me like you really delved into this. How much? What did you find out about it that you are kind of shocked? You're like, wow, I never knew these different things, or these different timbres, or this different time signature, or just these different sounds can all go together.
yeah, I think like my experience with it is like I really like it's such a deep study.
Yeah.
And in Arabic music, the idea of Arabic music is a very broad term too, because you go to different Arab countries, and they all have their different history of the music, with rhythmically and harmonically. And what I did was really just sort of get a fundament, just sort of like scratch sort of the surface of a lot of it.
Yeah.
But there were some fundamentals of it that I connected with, um, as opposed to trying to study a certain thing and then take it and adapt it. It was more like for instance, this system, modal system, or system of scales called maqam, which
Mm-hmm.
is a part of all these different Arabic music, Maqam, which is a series of modes that is created to express. Um, it's a scales and modes that serve different functions, and different countries and different parts of country use different versions of this scale.
Wow.
And so I just getting a basic understanding of how it worked, but I saw immediately how, or not immediately, after I dug into it for a while, I was like, all right, I can apply that in the concept of the way I am composing and improvising, instead of thinking in sort of a scalier way that I would, from studying the history of, bebop or postmodern, post bop stuff, or modern music, where I'm playing different harmonic things that are based on that music, or from, like, it's evolving out of like classical music, like contemporary classical music, but really thinking about these, how they're using these maqam modes, which are,
Mm-hmm.
was almost with the basic way I broke it down to sort of geek out with you and talk, like, just technically, it was just
Yeah.
like, was how they were breaking the modes down, or the scales down, into connecting different tetrachords, which are basically, parts of a scale. And that really was something that I gravitated quickly to, from just the way my compositional mind works, of quickly seeing how I can, it just sort of, the possibilities just blew up in my head, like, wow, I can really take that and make that, part of my thing. And it immediately pushed me in different directions in terms of sounds that I just basically touched on, and just scratching the surface on with this project.
Yeah.
But it was enough that, as I was writing things and heading with a certain direction in my writing, I was like, I was able to apply some of these concepts that brought in some of those colors, in a way that felt true to me, rather than trying to co-opt something that I didn't have a deep understanding of. But it felt, it was getting into the vibe and the mode of where I was going with the music. So
Well, it sounds like every time you compose stuff, you always, I think, from our conversation when we did the feature interview, I mean, you always pull things out, you find stuff, and then you put that into your the back of your mind, and things come out. So this project sounds to me like you downloaded a lot of information that in the coming years you're going to be able to start bringing out in your playing, whether you're writing or you're playing or anything. I mean, just what you're talking about right now tells me that as a musician, you're going to you probably opened up a bunch of concepts that you never really knew. Now, you probably don't know how to use them exactly the way you're going to use them in a couple of years. But it sounds to me, when you do these projects, it's fascinating to me how you just deep dive into stuff, and then you can download this stuff into your playing, and it slowly, probably in the next couple of years, it's going to start to come out even fluider. That's what I find fascinating about doing these types of commissioned works.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's what was wonderful about it. It gave me the
Yeah.
opportunity to really explore that. And also, it was, I had all these other gears just for this commission that I had been wanting to explore with writing for strings and also writing more expansive compositional forms that weren't, that were, for lack of a better term, somewhat classical in nature in terms of some of the structures that were created. And what was cool was, I had all those things that were interests and loves of mine that I wanted to just write music and worry about how it was defined later. But a lot of these little type of Arabic like musical elements applied to those other things as well, like adapting some of those maybe like an oud rhythm
Yeah.
to the string quartet. And that's where I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. This is kind of different. And the group that I was working with, the Kaya String Quartet's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful group based in Chicago, has a real they have sort of a real affinity for playing these world rhythms, like an unusual like ability to do this. And so I was able to write figures breaking up, an oud pattern or a certain rhythmic grooves that I would distribute to the string quartet, that they might play as ostinatos or something that would
Mm-hmm.
imply a different kind of mode that I can then blow on. And then I can
Ah.
create, and then I can create horn pads that are supporting that color. And so it's bringing all these elements, but it's all driven by where I wanted to come from with the music of where I'd been coming from over the years, and
Yeah.
just being able to bring these things into the mix as opposed to trying to just take those features and just you know take them and just try to play like that style of music, which I would have never been able to pull off successfully anyway. But it was enough to break pieces of that I was understanding at a more molecular level that then I can plug in. It was just a little morsel that I could
Yeah.
take a flavor and put it in my own way, kind of thing.
Man, that's unbelievable. And I'm trying not to go down the wormholes because we could talk for 2 hours because that's what happened when we did the feature interview. So I'm not going there. But the Kaya String Quartet, I know that they've recorded with a lot of different artists. I mean, it's also wonderful to work with a string quartet that works together because it's not like
Yeah.
you're putting people together, especially for the compositions you're describing. You would really need a cohesive group of people working together. Let's talk about the other guys on the recording. Now, I know most of them because a lot of them are like, first call guys, the guys in Chicago. I know you play with them for a long time as well. Michael Rayner on
Mhm.
drums, John Wojciechowski sax, Jeff Bradfield sax, Tito Carrillo trumpet. But talk about Omar, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name. I'm going to let you do that.
Yeah.
And anybody else on the recording that I missed?
Yeah. Also, James Cook on
That's it.
bass
Yep.
was yeah, all those musicians you mentioned. I've been very fortunate to have, a long, fruitful musical relationship with them over the years. That was what was great, as far as knowing that I can write whatever I want, and these guys are gonna, both as improvisers, but also as a unit, especially the three horns,
Yeah.
um, that they, will be able to blend. I don't have to say much. I don't have to really say much to them at all about that. And I know it's those three guys, from playing with them, what they're gonna do, and it's gonna be great.
Well, they're also
And
they're
they
also
understand
those guys.
my language, so my musical language. And then Kamak, I've known James Kamak, for 26 years now, and it was a great opportunity, this project, to bring him back in the mix, because he's just got a relentless groove that I knew that if I was going to write some different type of grooves, of experiment with some things, he was going to, whatever it was, he was going to ground it, and he was going to make it propel. And that's exactly what happened. And then bringing Rayner in the mix, he did a great job of combining both the written material that I had, and then just a real, like, sort of loose jazz feel on top of
Mm-hmm.
that. And so the combination was, I was very pleased with, what those guys do. They're so great at it. And then Omar, you mentioned, I had never. So one of the last pieces to this puzzle was the percussionist, and I knew that that color was, because again, like I was just bringing in these different elements to a lot of the stylistic things that I tend to write. But now I was pulling it in some of these Arabic flavors, Arabic colors, and um, having someone who can get inside it in a sort of not in both a traditional way, but also have this sort of looseness to to the way we were adapting those types of rhythms and feels was going to really give it the flavor that
Yeah.
I was looking for. And I was very lucky to connect with him um, through Amir El Safar had mentioned his name to me, and I had never met him before. And he's a well-known player who he teaches at NIU, and he
Hmm.
owns a restaurant in one of the I think like south suburbs as well, like in
Oh, really?
a Middle Eastern restaurant, but he's also a professor, and he's done some pretty serious tours with some major artists.
Yeah.
And he came in and quickly got inside what I was looking for, and I gave him a basic framework. I said, I'm just here's the groove. I'm looking for such and such type of a color, but he really came up with the parts and just really tied things together in a beautiful way.
Now, James Kamak, didn't he play? He played with Ahmad Jamal, didn't he? Was
Yeah,
that James? Right?
he is still.
He
He's
is,
been with
right?
them for like 38 years.
Yeah, right. Jesus. Yeah. So there's your groove right there, right? And then,
Yeah, he's a powerhouse,
and then,
and he was somewhat of a mentor to me when I was just getting started too, because he was living in Chicago, and as I was just cutting my teeth, he was very generous and playing, like we play all the time, and sharing a lot of insights from playing with Ahmad. And he
yeah.
thinks in a very from playing with Ahmad, he thinks in a very compositional way, and he approaches his bass playing, and so it's a really great fit.
Oh yeah, for
And
what
he's
you're doing. And then also the three horns, John and Jeff and Tito, all of those guys are also, and this is why I think it's such a key. And I mean, I think it probably works so well with this project specifically because first off, they're all open minded, but second of all, they also write their own music and they lead their own groups. So when they come into your project, and they get the charts from you and they're looking at what you wrote and all that, obviously they have open minds, but also are they giving you a little insight and saying, what if you do this? What if you do that? I mean, I know that sometimes I love asking composers this because sometimes composers are like, no, I want it played this way because this is what I'm hearing. This is the way it is. Or are you somebody, which I think you are, that will take a little bit of input from different people, especially guys you trust, and say, that's a good idea. So, what was the collaboration on that part of the compositions like?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's an important thing, and that's what makes working with these guys special. I will generally come in with very well. It's sort of a mix actually, and with this project in particular, there was again, for lack of a better term, to say a classical component to it in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the the amount of detailed writing. It was just very scored out,
Yeah.
like, and there were parts that were very specific I had in mind, and then there's parts, and this is generally how I like to balance these things. Will be things that are be very detailed, and then when it comes to the blowing sections, like just wide open, like not a lot of information at
Yeah.
all, like not many chord changes. But it's even with in both those contexts, that's what's so great about there's many things of how those guys handle that music so well, is that they can navigate those worlds so well. And as band leaders themselves, and I've worked with I think all of them in their groups as well. So there's a real trust between us, and we each know each other's vocabulary as well. Um, they know when to play specifically what I'm looking for, but they'll see something and they'll say, well, I see this, but do you mean this, or what do you think if we do this, or and I'm always open to that and welcome it because
Yeah.
it always makes the music better. Um, and it's always a push and pull. It's very open, like it's very open, and in the end, it's always like there's a lot of trust there in a way it is really special, and I'm very grateful for that with those guys.
Well, and that's that's why you work with those guys. There's that back and forth, and you wouldn't be taking their advice if you didn't actually respect their advice. So that's why the
Yeah.
whole thing works out, and that's what helps, I think, to create the best possible creative project. And I'm sure that's what this is. So I can't wait to hear it. So it's coming out when? July 17th. But you mentioned before we came on, there's going to be a website specifically for it, and you're going to announce that maybe next week.
Yeah, pretty soon. I gotta discuss that with the label to make sure the timing of that. But the record comes out officially July 17th. And yes, I am creating a web page dedicated just to the album, especially since the performance opportunities for this year we're going to be have been cut short. We're supposed to do
Yeah.
record releases this month,
Yeah.
and I wanted to create something. And this is something that I'm always looking for anyway, that you don't always get in online listening situations. Because now there are going to be less opportunities to get the CDs at live performances, I wanted to create something to create the effect like you can have the CD in your hand, where you can learn about the music, see the line, learn about the liner notes, get the idea of the story, what's the music about, learn about the ensemble, see the credits, see the pictures from the studio, um, and get all the personnel details. That's all going to be on a single web page, so it's like you're holding the CD in your hand. That will be available on my website soon, probably before the 17th. So stay tuned. Check my website out. It's all the website. My website's going to be updated. It's about to be updated like in the next day, and we'll have some information about that. And that new site will be up soon too.
How are you guys? I mean, you brought up a point that I talk about on this show a lot, but we didn't talk about it. But the COVID-19 situation, I know, you're able to still write, obviously, and still compose, and also I know that you're up on technology, so it's easy for you to do Zoom things and all of that. But I mean, when you're releasing a recording like this, and you have to put everything on hold, including record releases, and I'm sure you had some tour dates and festival dates and all of that, everything got postponed. Does everything just get pushed? Everything's virtual for right now, and then you kind of replan when you're going to actually do a live release? I mean, how are you planning things for? Obviously, the rest of this year is probably gone, so 2021. What are the plans for that, if there are any?
Yeah, it hasn't been a clear cut like rescheduling, and I think
Yeah,
this is pretty typical for a lot of folks where there's still this day by day sort of things that are waiting to see if what's going to be intact. Now, at this year, at this point, a lot of big festivals and series have, made their determination in terms of what's going to happen and what isn't. But some of them we're still waiting to see what they can still do for the rest of the year, and that everything is being affected in terms of what's going to be available next year. So there's a lot of organizations that uh, the structures that were always in place are just not anymore, to be able to just sort of then say, oh, we're going to put this in next year's program
right.
because we don't know what our funding situation is going to be. It's a dynamic situation. So, I was, I had dates this summer that aren't rescheduled yet. I think they will be, but the venues are still scrambling to figure out what that's going to be. They don't know yet how it's going to restructure. But the hope is that, yeah, they will have something, an idea in place soon, and then they'll start trying to put the people that miss the dates in the upcoming calendar, yet reconcile them with the ones that they still had at the beginning of next year. So it's going to be a challenge, I think,
Yeah.
moving forward. There's no definitive thing yet. I have a couple things scheduled for next spring that I'm hoping are going to remain intact, assuming that the organizations remain. But there's still a bit of a what if in a lot of this that I'm, hopefully in the next month or two will, be clear. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and we talked before we came on, but I take the position as the director of entertainment and programming at the Epiphany Center for the Arts, and when you have capacity limits, some of the rooms can't open up anyway. So there's
Mhm.
going to be a lot of kind of fingers crossed when you have the larger rooms, because you just don't know what to do with that. And then also, like I always say, this is so different because even when there was the financial crisis in 2008, I mean, there was still business, there was still concerts, there was still
Hmm.
clubs, there was still something happening creatively. This is like the worst business to be in because you're relying on people sitting close to each other in a concert hall. So there's so
Yeah.
many variables that you're right. I mean, they can't just say, okay, great. You know what, Ryan? November 1st, everything's going to be great. We'll be good to go and we'll plan it for the spring. So yeah, there's a lot of flux, but I'm glad that you're putting this thing out because I think there is a very captive audience. I think the story behind this recording is fascinating. I love the fact that you're putting out its own website so that people can read the liner notes and understand the story and then listen to the recording and still then really get inside the recording. It's so important these days because I mean, how many people download digital things and they don't even read the liner notes? Nobody wants to read a little tiny thumbnail of something.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea. I haven't heard of a lot of artists doing that, so I'm glad you're doing that.
It's funny, like, I talk about this with so many of my musician friends, like just coming up, uh, listening and learning this music, a big part of the experience, besides, in addition to playing an album, a CD over and over and over, you're sitting there with a group of tracks that made up the album. And you're sitting there with the liner notes that you're learning about what the project was, but you're getting insight of who's playing with who all the time, and you're connecting the
Yeah.
dots. And it's really, it was always a big part of the experience of coming into this music. So I always miss that,
Yeah.
with albums. I hope they'll include more of that later on. Just like, even if you just download something, that you'll be able to download the jacket or something, or the liner notes and the.
Yeah, well, I mean, you brought up a great point. I mean, I used to sit there and I would look at all of I'd read the liner notes, man. I mean, it was like getting a history lesson.
Yeah,
Even if the recording was recorded 50 years before I'm listening to it, you're getting a history lesson. You're learning about stuff. So, but I guess now, you can just go on YouTube and get all the information. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, hey, man, I really appreciate you jumping on here. Everybody head over to ryancohan.com in the next couple days. And then, of course, keep your eye out for the new release July 17th. But he's going to be launching different updates. So be sure to check that out. I'm sure he's going to shoot me an email. So we will have that updated on
for sure.
chicagojazz.com and chicagomusicreveal.com. And congratulations, man. I'm glad you're doing well. It's good to at least see you virtually. But as I always say, hopefully we will actually see each other in person at some point, too. So,
Absolutely. Thank you
congrats.
so much for having me on. Yeah, it's a pleasure speaking with you as always.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I always enjoy talking to you. And see, I managed to keep the interview about 45 minutes, so that was pretty good for us today. All right, thanks, Ryan. Take care.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, Ryan Cohan. So I'll tell you right now, this release, we talked about it. I'm going to encourage everybody head over to chicagojazzmagazine.com. It's the January 2019 feature interview. We did it. We get really in depth. If you are a musician and you're watching this, or if you're a music fan, you're watching this and you love the story that you just heard, head over and watch it. It's about a 45, 50-minute interview. And we specifically talk about his concepts, how he hears things, how he writes, how he starts to develop all of his themes really in depth. And it's a great interview. Not because I did it, because of what he's talking about. So encourage everybody to head over there, check it out, chicagojazzmagazine.com. Of course, all our feature interviews for the past 2 years are all on video. They're all sitting over there. So head over there, check all that stuff out. Now, tomorrow we are going to have a very special show. It is Thaddeus Tukes is going to be on. We are going to try to do something we've never done before, but I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to pull it off. It's a live listening event of his new release that is going to be dropping, I think, this week, maybe Friday. I think we're doing a little preview thing. I've got to touch base with him because we talked back and forth a little bit, and we never solidified some things. So either way, 6 p.m. tomorrow, we are going to be rocking and rolling here with Thaddeus Tukes, the great vibist. So it's always fun to catch up with him anyways, and we're going to be previewing his new release. And again, everyone that has been watching, I appreciate it, as I always say. If you like this show, please like it, please comment, please share it. And of course, tell your neighbors, call the family, call the grandkids tomorrow, 6 p.m. right here, Chicago Music Revealed. I appreciate everyone watching. Stay safe.